He used to sing under a flickering street lamp outside a liquor store. The only audience he had were night shift workers and passing headlights. Some tossed change, most didn't look. He never blamed them. That voice wasn't meant to be noticed back then. It was meant to survive. 15 years later, he stood on stage at the Grammys, fourth win, standing ovation, cameras flashing like fireworks. But when he turned to celebrate, there was no one behind the curtain. No old friends, no family, no team, just an assistant he barely knew, holding his phone. He had chased the dream until it became real. But the price? Everything that once made the music worth singing. He was born in a part of Baltimore that didn't make postcards. The sidewalks cracked like dried earth in summer. The street signs leaned sideways as if tired of standing. And the only music most people heard was the distant thump of police sirens or the buzz of busted air conditioners. His mother worked 2 cleaning jobs and still couldn't afford enough food to keep the fridge full. His father was a rumor, a name occasionally muttered but never truly remembered. The boy, who would one day fill stadiums with his voice, first found sound in silence, those long, empty hours after school when no one was home, and the only warmth came from humming old gospel tunes passed down through scratchy cassette tapes his grandmother left behind before she passed. Those tapes weren't high fidelity. They hissed, they warped, they cut in and out. But they had spirit. They had ache. And more than anything, they had truth. He didn't know what scales were or how to read sheet music. He didn't need to. He learned by echoing, by mimicking pain with pitch, by bending his voice to match the bends in his life. At 15, when most kids his age were chasing sneakers or street cred, he was chasing coins. He picked the corner outside a liquor store 2 blocks from home because the streetlight buzzed but stayed on. That meant visibility. That meant safety, or at least less danger. His microphone was air. His amplifier was traffic. Some nights, people passed by like he was invisible. Some nights, someone would stop and drop a few coins into the old fast food cup he set on the sidewalk. On better nights, he made enough for a warm sandwich. On worse ones, he went home with nothing but a sore throat and frozen fingers. He didn't sing because he thought it would lead anywhere. He sang because when he didn't, the silence inside him got too loud. Music wasn't his dream. It was his medicine. The city didn't give him many options. His high school was overcrowded and underfunded. His teachers changed every semester. The arts program had been cut years ago. But every time someone at the corner stopped for just 10 seconds and looked him in the eye like he mattered, he felt seen. He wasn't just a poor black kid with holes in his shoes. He was something more, something unnameable, something that cracked open when he hit the high notes. There were no mentors, no industry connections, no vocal coaches guiding him. His world was raw and rough, his melodies shaped by wind and concrete. On weekends, he took the city bus to other corners, experimenting with different crowds, testing his voice like a scientist tests chemicals. He noticed what made people pause. He learned to stretch syllables in ways that pulled hearts closer. He figured out how to make people feel with nothing but breath and willpower. By 17, he had a name around the neighborhood, Boy Blue. They called him that because of the way his voice lingered, melancholy and rich, like a trumpet played at midnight. Mothers brought their kids to listen for a minute before rushing off to second jobs. Old men nodded in rhythm as they walked by. One time, a street preacher stood across from him and wept. He never asked for more than loose change, but what he got, attention, respect, presence, was more valuable. He wrote lyrics in the margins of old mail envelopes, napkins, and even on the backs of receipts. He couldn't afford a proper notebook. His songs weren't about money or women or violence. They were about being cold, about hearing your stomach growl louder than the TV, about watching your mother pretend the lights going out was a game. He sang about absence, about the invisible weight of dreams that feel too far to hold. At night, back home in the 1-bedroom apartment he shared with his mom and little brother, he stared at the ceiling and wondered if his voice would ever take him farther than the block. He didn't think about fame. He thought about heaters that worked, fridges that hummed, mornings without hunger. Music was never a plan. It was a response, a reflex, the one thing that gave shape to everything else falling apart. Still, somewhere deep inside, he hoped someone would hear him. Not just hear, but understand. Not just toss a coin, but remember. He didn't want charity. He wanted connection, a moment, a spark. And then one night someone filmed him, just a stranger with a phone. The video was blurry, the sound distorted by wind. But even through that, the ache cut through like a blade. A week later, the clip was on YouTube. 20,000 views in 3 days. He didn't know what that meant yet. He didn't even own a computer. But something had shifted. The streets that shaped his voice were beginning to echo it back. And for the first time, the music wasn't just survival. It was becoming something more, something dangerous, something possible, something like hope. After the blurry video of his late-night sidewalk performance reached more eyes than he ever thought possible, the ground beneath him didn't change overnight, but the air around him did. People on the block who once passed without a word now paused to nod. His name, once a whisper, became a question. Boy Blue, right? That kid who sings with his eyes closed? It was attention, but not yet momentum. The coins still dropped into his cup. The cold still bit at his fingertips. But when a woman with a camera and a clipboard asked if she could feature him on her blog about underground talent, he said yes with a cautious kind of hope. She took better video, clearer sound, and wrote a headline that read, "The Soul of the Streets." That post made it to someone else's feed, then another, then someone who mattered, a local promoter who booked small acts for open mic nights and basement showcases. The promoter didn't offer money, but he offered a microphone, a crowd, and a roof. It was enough. That week, Boy Blue performed on an actual stage for the first time, his voice echoing through dusty speakers, his nerves like static in his bloodstream. He was raw, unpolished, but the audience felt something they didn't expect to feel that night. Realness. Something unfiltered. Something heavy, but human. A clip from that show landed on the page of a mid-tier music blogger. The views climbed again, not viral, not fame, but noise, good noise. He didn't have a manager, he didn't have an agent. What he had was a busted phone full of DMs from strangers offering opportunities. Most were scams, a few felt legitimate. He didn't know who to trust, he barely trusted himself. He had no lawyer, no idea what a 360 deal meant. But when an independent producer messaged him with a studio invite and promised 2 hours of free recording time, he took the bus 2 hours across the city to show up early. The studio was small, the walls lined with foam, and it smelled like stale coffee and ambition. But it was quiet, and when he put on the headphones and heard his voice without wind or traffic or sirens behind it, he almost didn't recognize it. It sounded clean, real, big. The first song he recorded that day was called "Windows Don't Open," and it was about how every window in his childhood apartment was nailed shut with fear. The producer didn't say much, but he nodded slowly while the track played back, and when it ended, he said, "We should do more." Over the next few months, more meant sleeping on the producer's couch when the bus stopped running. It meant trading time for time, recording in exchange for helping him clean the studio, run errands, hold the mic for other artists. It meant staying quiet in the corner when bigger acts came through, knowing he wasn't ready yet, but learning everything he could from the way they worked, the way they carried themselves, the way they rehearsed and revised and demanded better of themselves. The producer introduced him to a small label, barely a label, more like a collective run out of a back office. They liked his voice, his look, his story. They didn't love his songs. They wanted hooks, catchiness, marketability. They wanted beats that slapped and lines that quoted well. He didn't argue. He was hungry, tired, hopeful. He said yes to every suggestion, tried every sound, remixed his pain into pieces people could dance to. One night, he signed his first contract. He didn't read it all. He understood some of it. He knew he'd get a small advance, just enough to help his mom catch up on rent and fix the leak under the sink. He knew they'd own the masters, that they'd shape his sound, that he'd owe them albums. But it felt like a door opening. It felt like a crack of light. The first single went up on streaming platforms with a cover he didn't choose, and a title they shortened to fit better in playlists. It wasn't the song that lived in his bones, but it had pieces of him in it. His rasp, his tremble, the way he stretched the word home like it hurt to say. The label paid for playlists. It started slow. Then it surged. 100,000 plays. Then 500,000. Then someone from a major label called. The couches changed. The conversations changed. Suddenly he was in green rooms, then in conference rooms, then on flights. His days were booked. His voice was scheduled. He learned how to perform for cameras, how to smile without showing teeth, how to speak in sound bites. He met stylists, got new clothes, cut his hair, got a stage name, shorter, cleaner, something they could put on merch. They gave him a publicist, and the publicist gave him a past. A rewritten one. The real one, about street lamps and cracked sidewalks and singing through hunger, wasn't gone, just softened, rounded at the edges. He released an EP, then an album, then a deluxe edition. The label sent him on tour with another rising artist. His face appeared on posters, then on playlists, then on screens in Times Square. He did interviews where people asked him how it felt to come from nothing. He always answered politely, but inside, he wanted to say he didn't come from nothing. He came from people, from pain, from corners that taught him how to hold notes the way some people hold grudges. But he didn't say that. He said what they needed. The money started coming in. Not fast, but enough. Enough to move his mom out of the apartment. Enough to buy a car that didn't squeal when it turned. Enough to make him feel like he had made it, or at least was getting close. But late at night, after the shows, after the cameras, after the contracts and champagne and compliments, he lay in hotel beds in strange cities and stared at the ceiling. He thought about the sidewalk, about the cup, about the music he used to sing when no one was listening. And he wondered quietly if the price of getting heard was forgetting why he sang in the first place. He had always imagined this moment, maybe not with precision, but in feeling. The roar of a crowd chanting his name, the flash of cameras reflecting off gold plating, the heaviness of a trophy cradled in hands that once carried grocery bags for tips. But when it finally came, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like silence dressed in noise. His first Grammy win arrived on a cold night in Los Angeles. He wore a designer suit tailored to a body that still bore the shape of hunger. He walked the red carpet, answered the same questions with a trained smile, posed for cameras like he meant it. When they called his name, the applause felt like static. He stood, walked to the stage, gave the speech they'd rehearsed in a PR office 2 weeks earlier. He thanked the label, the fans, the producers, the industry. But not the sidewalk, not the lamppost, not the cracked pavement that first caught his voice. He had meant to, but the moment passed too quickly, and maybe, deep down, he already knew those things didn't fit in this new room. That night, after the parties, after the photos, after the glittering chaos, he went back to the suite alone. The assistant had asked if he wanted people up, models, friends, press. He said no. He told himself he needed rest. But in truth, he couldn't bear to celebrate with strangers. He took the trophy out of its box, placed it on the hotel dresser, and stared at it until the sunrise erased its gleam. The next morning, every music blog had his name in bold. From the streets to the stage, they wrote, Voice of a Generation, Soul Survivor. None of them knew the real survival had started after the awards. The second Grammy came easier. The cameras already knew him. The fans expected brilliance. His second album hit platinum in weeks. It wasn't more honest. It was more curated. The beats hit harder. The lyrics were cleaner, simpler, made for crowds and chorus chants. The label loved it. It sold. And with each success came more bookings, more stages, more shows in places he had once seen only in magazines. But the tables stayed empty. The dinner reservations turned into meals alone. The old friends stopped calling, not out of envy, but because he never called back. He meant to. But time had changed its shape. He moved too quickly to keep up with birthdays or back-home barbecues. His mother came to one show in Atlanta, sat in the front row, watched him perform for thousands. She cried during a song he'd once written for her. He didn't notice. After the show, there were interviews, photo ops, contract talks. By the time he made it backstage, she had already left, thinking he was too busy. He called the next day. She didn't answer. Said she was proud of him but felt like a stranger at his concerts. Said she missed when he sang on Sundays in the living room. He promised to visit more. He didn't. The third Grammy came with a scandal. An ex-producer leaked a track and accused him of ghosting his past. It blew over, but something stuck. The idea that he was no longer the man who once sang under broken neon signs. His fans defended him, said he evolved. But inside, he felt like a shadow of his own sound. He tried to write something real, sat at a piano for hours, wrote verses full of dirt and ache. But the label said it wouldn't sell, said the people didn't want pain, they wanted anthems. So he rewrote, he performed, he smiled, he won again. But the fourth Grammy was the one that broke him, the one that came after a year of touring that left him voiceless and exhausted. The one where he stood on stage, camera lights bouncing off his eyes, and saw no one waiting behind the curtain. No father, no friends, no team. Just the assistant again, holding his phone, ready to usher him to the next room. He nodded, accepted the trophy, gave the same tired thank yous, and walked off stage to silence. That night, he didn't go to the party. He went home. Not to his mansion in the hills, but to the apartment he bought for himself in the city, the one no one knew about. Sparse furniture, a guitar in the corner, a mattress on the floor, no gold records on the wall. He placed all 4 trophies on the kitchen table, sat in front of them, waited for some feeling to arrive. Nothing did. He thought of the first time he sang for an audience, not the industry showcase, but the sidewalk set beneath that blinking street lamp. The look in one stranger's eyes when he sang a verse so raw it made them stop walking. That was the first standing ovation that mattered. And now, the crowd stood. The critics applauded. The money piled up. But the room inside him felt quieter than ever. He stared at the trophies until the morning came, and with it, the weight of what he'd won, and what he'd lost to earn it. He bought the house with little hesitation, the kind of mansion they showed in luxury architecture magazines, perched above the city where the skyline kissed the edge of the horizon like it belonged to him. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a music studio in the basement, a pool that glowed at night like a private moon. It had everything, except noise, except people. He thought success would sound louder, that the echoes of applause would somehow follow him through the marble halls. But they didn't. What remained was an almost painful silence, broken only by the occasional vibration of his phone, which rang less than it used to. The first week in the new house, he threw a celebration, or tried to. The label sent representatives. Some influencers came, took pictures by the wine wall, tagged him, posted smiling captions. He stood by the glass doors, drink in hand, nodding through conversations that didn't stick. No childhood friends made it. He hadn't told most of them, not out of pride, but because the calls had stopped feeling natural years ago. The ones who used to pass the mic to him at block parties now lived lives that didn't fit inside these gates. His father never came either. He sent an invitation, even booked a flight. But something in the tone of the voicemail said the answer would always be no. Too busy, his father claimed. But the truth was simpler. His father didn't recognize the son who'd gone from begging for rent money to buying his own mountain. So, The party ended early. The house remained. Large, quiet, grand in all the ways that magazines praise but souls do not. The sound system could mimic a symphony, but he rarely turned it on. Most nights, he moved through rooms like a ghost, walking barefoot over polished stone, past untouched furniture and framed awards. He built a studio thinking music would anchor him, but the songs no longer came easily. He sat in front of the keyboard, fingers hovering, unsure what truth he had left to sing. The melodies he wrote were technical, clean, impressive, but hollow. The lyrics felt recycled. He sang with precision, but not pain. And pain, once his muse, now lived buried beneath layers of success and image control. He tried to fix it by remodeling the studio, importing analog gear, flying in producers he once idolized. They complimented his setup, nodded at his gold plaques, and left with tracks they said sounded great. But even they knew it. Great isn't enough when you once had real. He walked the halls at night, past unopened doors, as if each one might contain a piece of the past that could reconnect him to something warmer. One led to the theater room, another to a recording booth, another still had boxes he hadn't unpacked, old photos, newspaper clippings, letters never mailed. He opened one and found a notebook from his street days, pages of lyrics scribbled in ink that had bled from rain, verses about hunger and heartbreak and surviving the grind. He read them slowly, almost as if someone else had written them. The voice was raw, honest, young. He placed the notebook on the piano, intending to come back to it. Days passed. He didn't open it again. In the mornings, he sometimes stood on the balcony and watched the city stretch awake beneath him. He used to be part of that city, weaving through subway cars, harmonizing against traffic noise, his voice fighting for space in a world too loud for dreams. Now, it was all too quiet. Even his neighbors, celebrities themselves, never knocked, never waved. Their lives stayed behind fences and tinted glass, just like his. There were nights when he left all the lights off and let the moon guide him through the house, tracing shadows on the walls like memories. In those moments, he heard echoes, not real ones, but remembered. The laughter of a friend from back home, the rhythm of a cipher circle at 3 a.m., the sound of his own voice when it trembled, not from performance, but from something honest. He missed those echoes, not the people necessarily. They had their own lives, and he had burned more than a few bridges, but the feeling of being seen without being packaged. One night, he ordered food from the same corner place he used to sing in front of, just to see. When the driver arrived, he didn't recognize him, called him boss, took a photo for proof, drove off. That night, he didn't eat. He stared at the cold food and wondered if fame always required this kind of trade. One morning, weeks later, a neighbor sent a housewarming gift, a bottle of champagne and a handwritten note. "We should get coffee sometime," it read. He never replied, not because he didn't want connection, but because he no longer remembered how to begin. How do you build something new when your entire world was forged from rejection? When applause replaced affection? When everything you own echoes your loneliness louder than your lyrics ever could? He turned off the lights again, let the house disappear into quiet, and told himself it was just a phase. But he knew better. Echoes only happen when something makes a sound first, and he hadn't made a real one in years. There were mornings he didn't speak a single word, not out of silence for effect, but because no one was there to listen. The assistant only came twice a week now, mostly to handle logistics, answer emails, and bring deliveries he never opened. On the other days, the mansion held its breath with him. The quiet was thick, like fog in a sealed room. It crept into the spaces between footsteps, into the corners of high ceilings and beneath closed doors. The sound of nothing had become a presence, a companion even, more consistent than the music industry, more faithful than the fans. At first, he tried to fill it. He bought speakers for every room, programmed playlists of past inspirations, vinyl crackling through the halls. But even music he once worshipped sounded thin. It wasn't that the notes had changed. He had. Somewhere between the second and third Grammy, between the luxury flights and the late-night studio bookings, he had detached from the thing that made the melodies matter. It wasn't depression exactly, not at first. It was numbness. A quiet resignation that vibrated beneath the surface. He wasn't sad. He wasn't happy. He simply was. The treadmill of fame had kept him running for so long that when it stopped, he couldn't remember what stillness was supposed to feel like. At night, he sat at the grand piano he rarely touched anymore, placing his fingers gently on the keys, not pressing down, just hovering, like a prayer without belief. The silence between notes grew longer. Some days he only played one chord, a minor seventh, soft and incomplete, like the echo of a goodbye. Outside, the world kept spinning. Songs he had once called his children now played in commercials and TikTok clips. Teenagers sang the hooks, barely old enough to understand the pain they once carried. He watched his face on screens, heard his voice on playlists, but it all felt like watching someone else. The version of him that existed in the public mind was loud, magnetic, composed. But the real version was none of those things anymore. He lived in a house with too many light switches and no lamps, a place where echo replaced conversation, where meals were eaten on couches and leftovers thrown away untouched. Sometimes he would sit on the balcony at 3 a.m., legs tucked under him, hoodie pulled low, and stare at the city he once begged to be seen in. He remembered the sidewalk beneath that old liquor store sign, the way the pavement pressed into his soles, the way his voice cracked when he sang through cold air. Back then, every coin that dropped in his cup felt like validation. Every nod from a stranger felt like a handshake from God. He had no fame, no following, no agent, but he had conviction. He had sound. Now, he had everything he ever wanted, except that. He wrote a song once about absence, about the way a person could disappear from their own life. But he never recorded it. The lyrics sat in a journal, written in blue ink, next to a receipt from a bodega he hadn't visited in a decade. Some nights he would read the words aloud, like reciting scripture, hoping something in them might spark. But all he heard was the silence between lines. Not emptiness, but stillness that sounded like a locked door. He thought about therapy, even booked an appointment. The assistant reminded him the day before. He canceled that morning. He wasn't ready to explain to someone how a person could win everything and still feel like they'd lost the only thing that mattered. His manager called, offered studio time in Paris, a collaboration with an international star, a chance to rebrand. He said he'd think about it. He didn't. The awards gathered dust. The plaques on the wall tilted slightly as the months passed. He didn't adjust them. It felt honest somehow, that even his accolades sagged. He rarely opened social media now. The likes still came, the comments still glowed. But he stopped reading them. They felt like applause after the show had ended. The curtain down, the stage empty, the spotlight searching for someone who had already gone home. The neighbors didn't knock. The press didn't ask questions. He had become part of the wallpaper of celebrity, present, shiny, muted. He started to go days without checking his phone, weeks without touching the mic. He didn't write, didn't hum, didn't whistle, not because he was punishing himself, but because he couldn't remember why any of it had once felt like breathing. He bought a dog, hoping for company. A quiet one, small, with sad eyes. The dog followed him through rooms but never barked. It curled up beside the piano, sensing perhaps that even animals knew when sound had left a place. They would sit together in the studio, the dog watching, him staring into nothing. A man with everything but a reason. One night he pulled out his old street recordings, MP3s stored on an external drive no one else knew about. The hiss of wind, the background noise of buses, the faint rumble of city traffic, and his voice, Young, cracked, beautiful. Singing not for fame, not for recognition, but because he had to, because silence had once meant surrender. He let the recordings play all night, not loud, just enough to remind the walls of who he used to be. As he lay in bed, eyes open, the past echoed faintly through the halls. A voice not yet packaged, a soul not yet priced, and for the first time in a long time, the sound of nothing didn't feel so complete. It felt like a question, and maybe, just maybe, like a beginning. The first time he sang again, it wasn't in a studio. It wasn't on stage. It wasn't even for a camera. It was in the kitchen, early morning, barefoot, coffee brewing, sun crawling through the blinds. The dog stirred at his feet, stretching with a quiet yawn. He hummed something familiar. Not a song anyone else would know, just a melody that used to live in his bones before the world pressed too many expectations into them. It slipped out without effort, like a bird remembering it could fly. That one hum turned into a verse, and then into something closer to a prayer than a performance. No microphone, no audience, just him and the sound of something real returning. He didn't rush to record it. He didn't scribble it into a notebook. He let it come and go like breath. That became his ritual. Every morning, before the noise of the world could find him, he sang. Not for fame, not for fans, not for charts or headlines. He sang to remind himself he was still here, that he hadn't vanished into the silence that once swallowed him whole. He began to write again, slowly, one line a day, sometimes less. Not everything rhymed, not everything fit a hook, but it was honest. He wrote about shadows, about hollow trophies, about missing people who weren't dead but might as well be. He wrote about the smell of concrete in the rain, the ache of being misunderstood, the strange comfort of being alone. He didn't call his agent. He didn't send demos to anyone. He started uploading anonymously. Late at night. Just voice and piano. A grainy phone recording. No name, no image, just sound. A few listeners trickled in, then a few more. Not millions, dozens, then hundreds. People who left long comments about how the songs made them feel less alone. No fangirling, no hype, just connection. Something began to shift. He started getting emails, not offers, but thank yous. People who said the songs saved their marriage, or got them through a breakup, or made them cry for the first time in months. It wasn't validation like he used to chase. It was communion, quiet and real. He declined an invitation to perform at an awards show. They wanted him to open. Big comeback moment, standing ovation guaranteed. He read the email and let it sit, then deleted it. That wasn't the story he wanted to tell anymore. Instead, he rented a small room in the back of an old record store. Vinyl lined the walls, dust in the corners, a piano in the middle, 40 chairs. He hung no posters, sent no invites, just posted a time and an address under the same anonymous name he'd been uploading with. The night of the performance, only 30 people showed up. Folding chairs creaked. Someone passed around tea and paper cups. He walked in wearing an old hoodie and jeans. No lights, no stage, just the piano, his voice, and the breath of 30 strangers. He didn't introduce himself, didn't explain the songs. He sang them slowly, raw, exactly the way he wrote them, in silence, for no one. When he finished, there was no roaring applause, just a stillness, a few tears, a hand on a shoulder. He packed up quietly. Left through the back, walked home, slept deeper than he had in years. That became his rhythm. Pop-up sets, anonymous uploads. No branding, no noise, just music for the people who needed it. One day, someone recognized him, not from TV or magazines, but from the way he sang. She said, "You're the voice I heard when I thought I didn't want to live anymore." He didn't say anything, just hugged her. That was enough. He no longer lived in the mansion. He gave it to a community center, moved into a modest home in a quieter part of town. He still had money, still had plaques, but they lived in storage now, not on walls. He drove a used car, wore old sneakers, no entourage, no spotlight, just rhythm, just breath, just mornings where he sang to the dog and forgot the Grammys ever happened. He was no longer famous, but he was finally free. Because what he lost in fans, he found in peace. What he gave up in spotlight, he reclaimed in soul. And while the world kept chasing stages, he chose sidewalks again, not the ones lined with liquor stores, but the ones inside people's hearts, the broken corners that needed music not for dancing, but for healing. He sang for one. That was enough. That was everything.